They say a man dies twice, first when his heart stops beating, and again when the world forgets he ever lived. I didn't know which death was crueler until the night the rain refused to end. That night, the streets buried my name under the sound of thunder, and every drop that fell seemed to wash away the last proof that I had once mattered. The world didn't kill me. It simply looked away until I disappeared. And that was the night I became a ghost. The storm had no mercy that evening. The sky hung low like a wound, the clouds bleeding over the town as if heaven itself wanted to drown the sinners below. I remember standing in the same square where I once ruled the market, a place that had echoed with my laughter, my orders, my pride, and yet not a single person met my eyes. My clothes were soaked, my shoes heavy with mud, and my soul felt stripped bare before the judgment of every face that passed without recognition. Once they called me Elias the merchant, the man of endless deals, trusted by nobles and envied by rivals. I had wealth, status, and the arrogance that always follows them both. My hands smelled of gold and spice. My words carried weight in every corner of the town. I believed myself untouchable, chosen, destined. I thought misfortune only came for those who lacked ambition. I thought poverty was a punishment for the lazy. But arrogance blinds faster than darkness. It was my closest friend who betrayed me, the one man I trusted as a brother. He had always been quiet, humble, and loyal, or so I believed. When he brought me a new investment plan, one promising doubled profits and a legacy that would outlive both of us, I didn't hesitate. I sold my last inheritance, mortgaged my home, and even took the dowry meant for my daughter's marriage. I signed every paper he placed before me, believing our future would shine brighter than the gold we traded. By dawn, he was gone. His house was empty, his stall abandoned, his accounts drained. My name was on every contract, every false debt, every stolen coin. I wasn't a partner anymore. I was the scapegoat. By evening, word spread faster than fire. The merchants I had once dined with turned their backs. The same voices that once praised my wisdom now cursed my greed. And just like that, my name became filth. My wife left in silence, taking our child with her. She said she couldn't bear to see what I had become. I watched them walk away from our door and realized that wealth can build houses, but not homes. By nightfall, I had nothing left. No roof, no bed, no name worth speaking. I wandered through the rain, clutching a worn satchel filled with useless papers, the proof of my ruin. The streets that had once bowed before me now rejected my steps. I passed beggars huddled beneath torn cloth, and I envied them. They had nothing to lose. I had lost everything. The storm grew colder, heavier. I walked until my legs gave out, until even the rain couldn't tell my tears from its own drops. And that was when I saw it, the church gate. Its tall iron bars rose before me like a wall between the living and the forgotten. Behind them, faint light flickered from a single candle near the altar window. I stood there, trembling, the mud clinging to my feet, my fingers numb from the cold. Something inside me broke. I could not walk another step. So I sank to the ground. The stones beneath the gate were slick and freezing. I pressed my back against the wall, feeling the roughness of it cut through the thin fabric of my coat. Every breath burned my lungs. Every sound of thunder felt like an echo of my failure. I thought of my wife's eyes, how quickly love had turned into pity. I thought of my daughter's voice calling me Father. And I thought of how none of them would ever call me that again. I told myself I'd rest only for a moment, just long enough for the pain to ease, just long enough to forget the face of the man who destroyed me. But despair is not a visitor that leaves when the storm clears. It stays, whispering in the rain, convincing you that you deserve it. The night grew silent. Even the rain softened into mist. The whole world felt hollow, except for one sound. A voice. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a dream. It was a voice, deep, calm, familiar. It spoke only one word: Elias. I froze. No one had spoken my name in months. I lifted my head, heart hammering, eyes straining through the curtain of rain. The churchyard beyond the gate was empty. Or so I thought. Then, in the corner of my vision, I saw him. A man stood at the steps of the church, tall, unmoving, his face hidden beneath a hood. The candlelight from inside caught the edge of his cloak, glinting against something metallic in his hand. He didn't move. He didn't speak again. But somehow I knew he was looking at me, not with pity, not with disgust, but with recognition. My throat tightened. I tried to speak, but the words died before they left my lips. Lightning tore across the sky, blinding me for a heartbeat, and when my vision returned, he was gone. In his place, something small and shining rolled down the church steps, clinking softly against the wet stones before stopping near my foot. A gold coin. I reached for it, and the moment my fingers touched it, pain shot through my hand. A heat so fierce it felt alive. I cried out and dropped it, staring as steam rose faintly from the surface. The coin was engraved with a strange symbol, a cross twisted with a serpent, and around it, words too faded to read. I looked around, desperate for the stranger, for anyone, but the street was empty. Only the rain watched me now. The coin still gleamed. Even in the storm, it refused to dull. Something about it felt wrong, yet I couldn't look away. My heart beat faster, not with fear, but with the strangest pull, as if that coin was waiting for me. I reached for it again, ignoring the pain this time, and held it close to my chest. The world grew quiet. The rain slowed. The air thickened. And then, I heard the voice again, closer now, inside me. Elias, it whispered, your story isn't over. The candle inside the church suddenly flickered and went out, plunging everything into darkness. A gust of wind howled through the iron bars, and the gold coin in my hand grew hot again, pulsing like a heartbeat. I tried to drop it, but my fingers wouldn't open. And somewhere behind the gate, unseen and unearthly, someone whispered, "Welcome back." Morning did not arrive gently. It broke through the mist like a confession forced from heaven. The air smelled of wet earth and guilt, and when I opened my eyes beneath the church gate, I thought for a moment that the night had erased itself. But the coin was still there, glinting beside me, its golden surface mocking the light of dawn. The storm had ended, yet the world felt heavier, as though something unseen still watched from the shadows I had survived. The sun rose weakly that day, pale and tired, spilling through the cracks between the clouds as if reluctant to touch the town. Every sound seemed distant: the creak of carts, the faint chatter of merchants, the laughter of children returning to the square. Life had begun again for everyone but me. I sat motionless at the church gate, staring at the strange coin resting in my palm. It no longer burned, yet I could still feel the echo of the heat under my skin, like an old scar remembering pain. Its surface gleamed with unnatural perfection. No stain of mud or soot dared touch it. I thought of the voice that had whispered my name through the storm, the voice that had spoken not from outside, but from somewhere inside me. I told myself it had been exhaustion, a trick of a dying mind. But before I could finish the thought, a shadow fell across the ground before me. I lifted my head, and there he was. The same figure from the night before, now visible in the pale light of morning. He stood tall and still, his presence unsettlingly calm amid the waking chaos of the town. His clothes were dry, his shoes spotless, as if the rain had never existed for him. Sunlight struck the edge of his face, revealing sharp features framed by a hood that refused to fall away. His eyes, I cannot forget them, carried both sorrow and power, like a man who had witnessed centuries and still mourned them all. "You know my name," I whispered, my throat tightening. He nodded slightly, as though it were obvious. Names are never truly lost, Elias. They only wait for someone willing to speak them again. The way he said my name, softly, without pity, pierced deeper than any insult could have. I felt suddenly naked before him, every secret, every failure exposed. "Who are you?" I asked. He looked at the coin in my hand. "You kept it," he said. "Then you've already answered your own question." I frowned. "It burns when I hold it. No one will touch it." "What is it?" He took a slow step closer, his voice low but clear. "A reminder that nothing is ever truly yours, not even your suffering." Before I could ask more, he placed another coin beside mine, identical in every mark and shine. "You'll understand," he murmured, "when you stop begging." And then he turned. I rose quickly, my legs weak, shouting for him to wait. But by the time I reached the end of the street, the man had vanished. Not a single footprint marked the wet ground where he had stood. Only the faint scent of incense lingered in the air, the same fragrance that drifted through the church on holy days. I clutched both coins tightly, confusion twisting inside me. Fear wrestled with curiosity. What did he mean by stop begging? Had he mistaken me for someone else, or was this the beginning of another cruel game from fate? Hunger soon overpowered my thoughts. I decided to sell one of the coins. Maybe its gold could buy me food, or even passage away from this cursed town. I walked to the market, where familiar faces turned away at my approach. The first shopkeeper, a man I once supplied with silk, hesitated when I showed him the coin. His expression changed from interest to terror. "Where did you find that?" he whispered. "I was given it," I said. "Why?" He backed away. "That symbol, it's forbidden. Take it from my sight." At the next stall, a jeweler crossed himself the moment he saw the engraving. "That's not gold," he said, trembling. "It's judgment." The crowd around me began to whisper. I felt their stares crawl over my skin. I pocketed the coin and fled, the weight of their fear pressing on me like invisible hands. By noon, I found myself before the priest. He looked weary when he saw what I held. After a long pause, he said, "That mark belongs to an old order. Men who believed that redemption was bought through suffering. Their creed was buried long ago, or so we hoped." "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means," he said quietly, "that your suffering may have just begun." He walked away without another word. As evening descended, I returned to the gate, exhausted and shaking. I laid the coins on the stone beside me, their glow dim under the fading light. For reasons I couldn't explain, I began to feel a strange pull towards the church, as though the air itself wanted me to move closer. The streets emptied. The first stars appeared through torn clouds, and from inside the locked church, a candle flickered to life. Through the small glass window above the altar, I saw the faint outline of a man kneeling. The same hooded figure, motionless in prayer. My breath caught. I pressed my hand to the cold iron gate, my eyes fixed on that silhouette. Then he lifted his head and turned toward me. The light behind him pulsed once, then flared bright enough to blind me. When my vision cleared, the window was dark again. But the church door, sealed for years, now stood, slightly open. The two coins in my hand vibrated with heat, their glow merging into one. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of burning wax. And in that silence, a voice, his voice, whispered from inside the church, "Come in, Elias, if you're ready to remember." There are moments when fate stops whispering and starts screaming, when the line between blessing and curse blurs so completely that a man can no longer tell whether he's being saved or punished. That was how it felt when the coin came alive in my hand. Its glow fierce and trembling, its heat cutting through my skin like fire drawn from the heart of the earth. It was gold, yes, but not the kind that brings comfort. It was the kind that remembers sin. the kind that knows exactly who you are and what you've done. I still remember that night as clearly as the first time I lost everything. The voice of the stranger echoed inside me long after his shadow vanished into the mist. "Come in, Elias, if you're ready to remember." But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to face the truth that waited beyond the church door, the truth that might strip away even the little dignity I had left. So instead of obeying, I did what cowards always do when fear begins to taste like faith. I buried it. The coin burned like a secret in my hand as I knelt beside the church steps. The earth was soft from rain, its smell heavy and alive, and with my bare hands I dug into it until the mud stained my skin like guilt. I pressed the gold into the hollow and covered it quickly, as though I could bury the memory of the man who had given it to me along with it. When I stood, the soil seemed to breathe, closing itself over the secret I had forced into its heart. Days bled into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Life became a slow punishment, and hunger turned from an enemy into a companion. I grew thin, quieter, almost invisible. The world had already forgotten me. I only waited for my body to catch up. People passed, sometimes pitying me with half a loaf of bread or a glance filled with disgust. The children no longer laughed. They crossed to the other side of the street, whispering that the beggar at the church carried the devil's mark. Perhaps they were right. And yet, amid all that silence, the priest remained kind. He never asked about my past, or the strange gleam that sometimes caught my eyes when the sunset struck the church gate. He would hand me scraps of bread, warm from the kitchen, and say softly, "Even stones can be softened by rain." I didn't answer. I didn't know how. The nights were the worst. Sometimes I would dream of the stranger again, his face half hidden by light, his voice cutting through the distance like thunder through clouds. In the dreams, he always stood at the altar, reaching out to me with a coin that burned without flame. And each time I refused it, his eyes grew sadder. I'd wake trembling, the sound of my own breathing mingling with the whisper of wind against the gate. It was during one of those nights that I heard it, a sound I hadn't heard in months. The church bell. It rang once, low and hollow, its echo rolling through the empty streets. I froze. The bell had been broken for years, the clapper lost in a storm, yet the sound was real. Too heavy, too sorrowful to be imagined. When the echo died, something else caught my eye. A faint shimmer near the steps where I had buried the coin. At first I thought it was moonlight reflecting off wet stone, but the glow was steady, breathing, and alive. I approached slowly, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear nothing else. The earth where I had buried the coin was no longer dark. It pulsed faintly beneath the soil, golden veins crawling through the dirt like roots of light. I fell to my knees and began to dig with my bare hands. The soil gave way easily, as though it had been waiting for me. My fingers touched metal, hot, smooth, alive. I pulled it free, and for a heartbeat, the night around me vanished. The coin shone brighter than it ever had, its surface alive with shifting light, the symbol of the cross and serpent twisting as if carved from living flame. I tried to drop it, but my fingers wouldn't obey. The heat spread through me, not burning flesh, but memory. My mind filled with images that weren't mine, flashes of fire, of men kneeling in chains, of voices crying for forgiveness inside this very church. I screamed, and the sound seemed to echo from somewhere far deeper than my throat. The air grew thick, the moon dimmed. Every shadow on the church wall began to tremble as though alive. I forced the coin to the ground and staggered back, gasping for breath. It lay there, still gleaming, and then something impossible happened. From the same hole where I had dug it, another coin began to rise. It pushed through the soil slowly, gleaming with the same cursed light, its surface unmarred by dirt. 2 coins, identical side by side, both humming faintly, like the beat of a heart. I could feel the sound in my bones. I stared, frozen between wonder and terror. What did it mean? Why has there always been another coin waiting beneath the first? Then I heard it, a single footstep behind me. I turned sharply, my pulse a drum in my ears. The street was empty. The fog thickened, curling around me like smoke. I took a step back, every instinct screaming to run. The air behind me moved. A whisper, a breath too close to be imagined. I spun around, but there was no one there, only the faint trail of heat rising from the coins. The church door, sealed for years, gave a quiet groan, as though something inside had stirred. I clutched both coins to my chest, my heart racing in time with their glow. And then, in a voice that didn't belong to any living soul, the darkness breathed my name again. Elias, you've unearthed what was never yours to hide. After the night I unearthed the second coin, sleep became a memory I could no longer reach. The darkness around the church no longer felt empty. It pulsed, it listened, it breathed. Every whisper of wind seemed to carry my name, and even when I closed my eyes I could feel the church watching me, its old stones quivering with secrets that refused to rest. It wasn't just a place of prayer anymore. It had turned into a living thing that fed on silence and waited for me to understand what I'd awakened. Days passed in uneasy quiet, yet every dusk carried the same unspoken promise that the night would belong to the church. Candles glowed behind its stained glass windows, long after the priest had locked the gates, and sometimes, when the world outside sank into sleep, I heard the faintest murmur of voices, prayers that never ended, voices that rose and fell like breath drawn from forgotten lungs. I asked the priest who prayed so late. His eyes darkened, and after a long pause he whispered, "Some prayers never stop, Elias. They linger until someone answers." Then he walked away. Before I could ask more, that evening I sat by the gate, staring through the bars. The light inside the church trembled as though stirred by unseen hands. The wind was still, yet the candles leaned toward the door, their flames bending like listeners. I told myself it was my imagination, but fear has its own kind of reason. It convinces you that the impossible makes sense. The next night, the voices returned stronger. They were not cries or chants. They were whispers layered over each other, 100 tongues murmuring in one endless breath. My skin prickled. I pressed closer to the iron gate until the cold bit through my sleeves. The air smelled of wax and something sweetly rotten. Beneath the whispering came a sound of movement, slow, deliberate, a dragging of feet across stone. Then the dull thud of a pew shifting, as though someone unseen had just stood. I called out softly, "Father?" The moment the word left my lips, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than sound. It pushed against my chest until breathing felt like trespass. I stumbled back, heart hammering, but the stillness pulled me forward again, like a tide. At dawn, I told the priest what I'd heard. His hands trembled as he traced the cross in the air. "Do not watch the church at night," he warned. "Faith isn't meant to see everything it believes in." His tone carried fear, not piety. I should have listened, but curiosity is stronger than obedience, especially when you've already lost everything worth protecting. The following night, clouds buried the moon. The street was empty. Even the dogs had gone silent. I waited near the gate, promising myself I would leave if the voices began again. But when the first whisper rose, I found my feet moving instead of retreating. The gate creaked softly beneath my touch. From inside came the slow groan of wood yielding. Then, without warning, the great church door drifted open, just enough for a single line of golden light to spill onto the steps. I should have run. Instead, I stepped forward. The smell of incense struck me first, thick, cloying, almost sweet enough to choke. Candles lined the altar, though no hand had lit them. Their flames swayed in unison, moving not with air, but with breath. Somewhere deeper within the church, something breathed back. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. The breathing quickened, matching my own. My shadow stretched across the pews, joining the darkness that pooled around the altar. Then I saw it. A figure kneeling where the light was brightest, its back bowed, hands clasped in prayer. Every instinct begged me to flee, yet I stepped closer, drawn by terror's strange gravity. The figure stirred. Slowly, it lifted its head and turned toward me. The light caught its face, and my breath stopped. I was staring at myself. Every scar, every hollow line, reflected perfectly, yet the eyes were wrong. They were darker, deeper, alive with a calm that felt older than life. My mirror image smiled, lips curling with quiet recognition, and in my own voice, steady and cold, it whispered, "You prayed for forgiveness, Elias. Now answer yourself. There are truths buried so deep that even heaven pretends not to remember them. Beneath the stone bones of every holy place lies a secret the saints dare not whisper, because some prayers, once answered, cannot be silenced again." After the night I saw my own reflection praying inside the church, sleep became a punishment I could not escape. I felt the church breathing through its walls, its silence waiting, its shadows pressing closer each time I tried to forget. I knew, with the kind of knowledge that grows in the gut, that something beneath that altar was calling my name. The priest noticed the fear that had hollowed my face, and perhaps out of pity or divine testing, offered me work sweeping the church in exchange for bread. I accepted, though every stone I stepped on seemed to hum faintly beneath my weight, as if the ground remembered me. Morning light spilled through the stained glass windows in trembling colors, crimson, gold, violet, bleeding across the floor, like wounds that refused to heal. I began my labor in silence, the wooden broom scraping against ancient tiles that had listened to centuries of whispered sins. The church smelled of wax and smoke, of sanctity and decay. The air itself felt heavy, as though the prayers trapped inside these walls had thickened it. I worked carefully, forcing my mind to focus on rhythm. Sweep, turn, breathe, until the sound of the broom against the floor changed. It wasn't the dull, steady drag of stone anymore. It was hollow, like striking the lid of an empty coffin. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest, louder than the broom. I tested the floor again. There it was, one single tile that echoed differently than the rest. I knelt, brushing away dust until I found a hairline crack where the grout had crumbled. Beneath the sunlight, that small imperfection seemed almost deliberate, a doorway disguised as damage. I hesitated. The priest was praying near the confessional, his voice low, distant. I told myself I only wanted to look, that I would close it again the moment I saw what lay beneath. My fingers found the corner of the tile, and with a soft groan, the stone lifted. Cold air rose from below, the kind of air that hasn't moved for years. The space beneath was small, lined with wood, and inside it rested a box, old, blackened by time, bound in iron that glinted like a scar. My pulse quickened as I lifted it out and set it on the floor. The hinges resisted, creaking like something protesting the return of memory. When the lid finally gave way, light poured out, a soft golden glow that seemed to breathe. Coins, dozens of them, neatly stacked, perfect, untouched by dust or time. Each one bore the same twisted mark as the cursed coins the stranger had given me, a serpent coiled around a cross. The sight of them made my stomach twist. They were not wealth, they were warnings. Behind me, I heard the sound of cloth rustling, and when I turned, the priest stood frozen at the altar, his face as white as wax. His lips trembled before words escaped them. "Close it," he whispered. "In God's name, close it." I shook my head. "Father, what are these? Why are they here?" He stepped closer, but not to help, to stare. His eyes had that distant look of a man who sees both the past and the future at once. "So it's begun again," he said, voice low, hollow. "What has?" I demanded. My own voice echoed through the empty hall, louder than it should have. The priest's gaze flicked toward the floor. "The last time this box was opened, a fire consumed the church," he murmured. "They buried the coins beneath new stone, believing they'd buried the curse as well. But sin, Elias," his eyes met mine, "sin always finds air." I wanted to question him further, but a sudden wind swept through the nave, strong enough to snuff out every candle. The air turned cold, sharp with the scent of metal and ash. The old wooden rafters groaned as if remembering a pain once felt. And then, the bell. It began as a faint tremor high above the tower, then deepened into a roar that filled every corner of the church. The walls shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The coins inside the box trembled like things alive. I stumbled backward, clutching the altar for balance. The priest fell to his knees, whispering a prayer so quickly it sounded more like a plea. The bell rang again, once, twice, then a third time, though its clapper had been missing for years. The sound was not metallic. It was human, a voice echoing through stone. The coins shone brighter, their engraved serpents seeming to writhe in the light. I turned toward the tower, my heart pounding like the tolling itself, and somewhere, within the sound, beneath the echo of iron and air, I heard it again, my own voice, whispering through the ringing, "You've opened their grave." Morning did not arrive gently. It tore open the sky like a wound. A red haze clung to the horizon, and the air carried the scent of smoke long before the first cry rose from the town. When I looked toward the church, flames were already licking the steeple, twisting upward like hands clawing at heaven. It was not lightning, nor accident, nor vengeance from men. The fire felt deliberate, as though the heavens themselves had leaned down to breathe judgment into dry wood. People poured into the square half-dressed, their voices tangled in panic and prayer. Buckets passed from hand to hand, water sloshing uselessly against the inferno that roared from the roof. I pushed through the crowd, the heat searing my face even from the gate. Somewhere inside those walls lay the box of coins I had unearthed, the proof of the curse that had already begun to awaken. The priest was nowhere in sight. I don't remember deciding to enter. One moment I was watching the fire consume the stained glass windows. The next I was forcing the door open, a blast of smoke striking me like a physical blow. The air tasted of ash and burning wax. Every step was agony. The floor beneath my boots cracked and spat sparks as though trying to warn me back. The great beams above groaned, raining cinders in slow, deadly snow. Near the altar I found the priest collapsed, his robe smoldering, his skin gray with soot. I dragged him toward the door, coughing so hard I could barely see. Behind us the flames devoured everything, the pews, the tapestries, even the crucifix splintered with a sound like breaking bone. My eyes burned. My lungs clawed for air. But through the blinding smoke, I saw the place where the box had rested beneath the floor. The stones had cracked open again, and within that fissure, a glow pulsed faintly, gold against the red chaos around it. I reached for it, but the roof screamed and collapsed. The world became fire and thunder. I remember the weight of falling beams, the sting of heat across my back, the priest's limp body pulling at my arm. Somehow I found the doorway again. We tumbled into the street just as the roof caved in behind us. The crowd dragged us clear. The priest coughed and clutched my sleeve, his eyes wide and wild. "It's not over," he rasped. "You've been chosen to rebuild what was lost. Chosen." The word struck harder than the smoke in my lungs. I turned toward the ruins, the same church that had haunted every dream, and for a heartbeat, the fire seemed almost beautiful. Within its heart, amid the ash and collapse, something glimmered. When dawn finally came, the flames had died to whispers. The air was thick with the scent of wet ash and burned faith. I stepped over the smoldering stones, my boots sinking into soot that had once been pews. Everything was gone. Everything except one thing. There, half buried in the gray dust, lay a single coin. It was untouched by flame, its surface clean, its glow steady, breathing like the heart of the fire itself. I picked it up, expecting heat, but it was cold, colder than death. As I turned the coin over, I saw a slip of parchment curled beneath it, edges blackened, yet words still legible. The seal pressed into its wax bore the same serpent cross symbol, and above it, my name, Elias. My hands shook as I broke it open, but before I could read, the ground beneath the ashes shuddered, releasing one last breath of heat. The dying fire hissed as though speaking, and from the hollow where the church had stood came a whisper that carried through the smoke. Not everything that burns is lost. It began with a single line. Your fall was never an accident. The words glowed faintly against the blackened paper, as if the fire that had destroyed the church had spared this one message out of reverence. The seal on the letter bore the same twisted serpent around a cross, pressed deep into red wax, and my name was carved above it. Not written, carved. I held it in shaking hands, feeling the weight of something that knew me far better than I knew myself. I didn't want to open it, but the letter felt alive, as though it was reading me while I hesitated to read it. The sun had barely climbed above the horizon when I broke the seal. The wax cracked like bone, and the faint smell of smoke rose from the parchment. The first sentence was enough to freeze the breath in my chest. Your fall was never an accident. You were brought low so you could learn how to rise. My fingers tightened around the paper, my pulse thundering in my ears. Who could have written this? The stranger? The priest? Or something older? Something that watched me from the shadows of the burning church. The letter went on, every word carved into me like scripture written in fire. It spoke of redemption not as mercy, but as labor, that forgiveness must be built, not received. It told me that sacrifice was not punishment, but purpose. You will rebuild what the fire took, it said, and when you do, you will find what truly burned. My eyes blurred as I read the next line. Forgive the one who betrayed you. His sin was the mirror of your own. The words struck harder than any blow. For years, I had blamed the man who had stolen my fortune, my name, my life. Now the letter told me that his greed had only reflected mine, that we had both been servants of the same flaw. I wanted to tear the paper apart, to reject the message, but my hands refused. The ink shimmered faintly, as if the letter's truth burned from within it. It ended with a command. Leave this place of ashes. Rise from what you buried. Work until your hands remember what giving feels like. When you can feed others without hunger in your soul, return, and your answer will find you. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at those final words. The ruins of the church whispered around me, the ashes stirring in soft, circular breaths as though listening. The priest slept nearby, exhausted and frail. I folded the letter and slipped it into my coat, its warmth pressing against my heart like a coal that refused to die. For the first time in years, I stood without trembling. The fear that had haunted me since the first night at the gate began to shift, turning into something else. Not strength yet, but the shape of it. The world still looked broken, but it no longer looked empty. I knew then what I had to do. I would rise, not as a beggar, but as a man rebuilding what the fire had taken. I would earn again, give again, live again. Even if it killed me, I would not let that letter become a lie. I turned away from the ashes, the letter's words echoing like a heartbeat. Rise. As I walked toward the edge of town, the morning light caught something behind me, a faint shimmer where the fire had burned hottest. I turned, heart hammering, and there he was, The stranger stood amid the ruins, untouched by soot or smoke, his cloak as dark as the night that had birthed him. He looked at me once, neither smiling nor frowning, and then the wind carried his voice through the silence. "You've read what was never meant for mortal eyes." The world smelled different after the fire, sharper, cleaner, as if the smoke had burned away more than just wood. From the ruins of faith and failure, I stepped into the marketplace again, not as the proud merchant I once was, but as a man learning how to live with empty hands. The letter's command echoed in me with every sunrise. Work until your hands remember what giving feels like. I carried that sentence the way others carried prayers, not to beg, but to begin again. The market had changed since the days I'd ruled its noise. Faces that once smiled at my wealth now barely recognized me. The smell of spices and sweat mixed with the sound of clinking scales and haggling voices. It was a world I knew, but no longer owned. I started at the bottom, carrying sacks of grain for men who used to call me Sir. Their laughter followed me through the alleys, yet I bowed my head and worked. Humility is the hardest labor of all, but it pays in lessons no coin can buy. At night, I slept beneath the awnings of the stalls, the wind heavy with the scent of dust and roasted beans. Every ache in my body reminded me I was alive. I saved every copper coin I earned, stacking them in a small wooden box, never touching the golden coin that still hid inside my coat. That one I feared. It was not mine to spend. It was mine to remember. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, people began to notice that I never cheated, never lied, never took more than I earned. The same men who had once mocked my fall began leaving extra work at my feet. "He's honest," they said, as if honesty were rarer than gold. A cobbler trusted me to mend shoes. A baker allowed me to deliver bread. A spice merchant let me count his scales. Little by little, my name began to heal. Not the name that had been shouted in the market years ago, but a quieter one, built on sweat, not status. When I had saved enough, I rented a small corner near the edge of the square, just a wooden counter and a canopy to shield the sun. I sold simple things: thread, buttons, polished stones, scraps of cloth. Each sale was a victory, each honest bargain a prayer answered. I learned to trade again, not for profit, but for peace. Failure had taught me what greed never could, that worth is not measured by what you own, but by what you build with your own hands. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I would open my small box of savings and count the coins one by one. The weight of them felt different than gold ever had. They were earned, not inherited, clean, not cursed. Yet no matter how much I earned, the letter's words haunted me. When you can feed others without hunger in your soul, return. I had not yet fed anyone but myself. That truth cut deeper than any debt. Still, for the first time in years, I felt alive enough to hope. The world that had once spit me out now began to open again, slow, cautious, but real. I looked around my tiny stall and saw not poverty, but the beginning of purpose. I thought of the stranger, the coins, the fire, and wondered if destiny had finally stopped watching and started guiding. Then, one morning, the world shifted again. As I lifted the stall's curtain to begin the day, something gleamed on the wooden counter. A coin, not copper, not silver, gold. Its surface shone untouched by dust, marked with the same serpent and cross I had buried years ago. My breath caught as I reached for it. The metal was warm, and before my fingers closed around it, a voice behind me whispered, "You can't trade destiny, Elias." 5 years had passed since the fire. 5 years of sweat, silence, and rebuilding. Time had stripped away the ashes from my life, yet it left behind scars that glowed in memory. Each dawn began with the smell of dust and ended with the weight of earned coins resting heavy in my hands. Proof that I had rebuilt myself from the dirt the world once spat upon. I believed I had outrun my fate, until one night, the golden coin I'd kept hidden for years began to glow again, brighter than any flame that had ever burned the church. I had become a man of worth again, though I no longer chased wealth. The townspeople who once crossed the street to avoid me now greeted me with respect, some even with pride. I owned a modest stall at the center of the market, trading in honest goods, cloth, spices, simple tools. My name once again carried weight, not because it bought power, but because it carried truth. The years had humbled me, yet they had also given me something far greater than riches, the peace that only labor and forgiveness can build. Every evening, I still walked the road that led past the ruins of the old church. The stones remained blackened, the cross half buried in ivy. The wind that passed through that place always carried the faintest echo of bells, though no tower remained to hold them. Each time I passed, I felt the pull, a quiet voice in my chest whispering that my journey with that place was not over. Then, one morning, as I sat behind my counter sorting trade ledgers, a customer mentioned something that made my heart still. "They're selling the church," he said. "The land, the ruins, everything. The diocese can't pay its debts." For a moment, the world around me fell silent. The market's noise faded. All I could hear was the faint ringing of an old memory, the sound of rain striking the stones of that gate, the voice that had once whispered my name through the storm. I closed my eyes, and in that silence, I knew. It was time. That night, I unlocked the small chest hidden beneath my bed. Inside it lay the same golden coin I had sworn never to touch again. It glowed faintly, a soft pulsing light that painted my hands in gold. For years I had feared it. Now it felt like it was waiting. I turned it over between my fingers, tracing the serpent wrapped around the cross. For the first time, I saw it differently, not as a symbol of curse, but of transformation. The serpent shed its skin to live again. Perhaps I was meant to do the same. When I left my home that night, the streets were empty, the air thick with mist. The moonlight shimmered on the coin as I held it up to the sky, and I whispered a promise. "If this is what you wanted from me, then I will finish it." 5 years of redemption had led me here, to the gate where my downfall began. The same gate where I had once begged for mercy, where my name had first been spoken by the stranger who saw me through the rain. The past and the present had folded into one. I was no longer the beggar at the gate. I was the man who had survived it. When I arrived at the auction the next morning, my pulse thundered louder than the crowd's chatter. The church's ruins stood beyond the window, silent and waiting. I raised my hand to bid, and then froze. Across the room, seated in the front row, was the stranger. His face untouched by age, his eyes burning with the same calm fire I remembered. He looked at me, smiled faintly, and lifted his hand to bid against me. There are moments when the world folds upon itself, when time becomes a circle, and every path you've walked leads you back to where you first fell. That morning, I stood inside the grand auction hall with trembling hands, not as a beggar, not as a merchant, but as a man about to purchase his own ghosts. The smell of polished wood and ink filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of rain seeping through the open windows, the same rain that had once washed me out of my own life. I raised my hand, not to buy a building, but to buy back the part of my soul that had been left kneeling in the ashes. The hall shimmered with wealth, jeweled hands clutching pens, whispers of numbers that could buy anything except redemption. Men who once mocked my name now sat draped in silk, bidding on lands they'd never walk, estates they'd never touch. Yet none of them saw what I saw, the ghost of a gate beneath a storm, the echo of a bell that had refused to ring, the ruins that had once mirrored my despair. The auctioneer's gavel tapped the desk with mechanical rhythm. Lot 32, St. Arthan's Church. Starting bid, 500. A low murmur rippled through the room. They spoke of it as cursed ground, a wasted purchase, an omen better left untouched. But to me, it was memory carved in stone. My hand twitched, but before I could move, another voice cut through the noise. 600. It was calm, deliberate, and chillingly familiar. I turned, and there he was, the stranger. The same face untouched by time, the same quiet composure that seemed to draw the light toward him. His gaze met mine, and in that brief exchange, the years between us vanished. The room faded, the crowd dissolved. Only he and I remained, bound again by the same invisible thread that had haunted me since the night of the storm. My breath wavered. 700, I said. He smiled faintly, as though amused by the inevitability of it all. 800. The people around us whispered, sensing something beyond money at stake. I could feel the coin in my pocket warming against my thigh, its pulse beating in rhythm with my heart. The priest sat in the corner, his frail hands clasped in silent prayer, his eyes locked on me. I could almost hear his unspoken words. Finish what you began. 1,000, I said. The gavel paused mid-air. The stranger's eyes gleamed like dying embers. 1,200, he murmured. A memory struck me. The letter's words burned in my mind. You will rebuild what the fire took, and when you do, you will find what truly burned. My voice rose above the silence. 1,500. The air thickened. The stranger leaned back, the faintest trace of satisfaction curling across his lips. He said nothing more. The gavel came down like thunder. Sold. The sound rang through the chamber, final and fateful. The room applauded politely, unaware that I had just purchased not land, but destiny. The priest approached slowly, his voice trembling with both joy and fear. You've closed the circle, Elias, he whispered. But circles don't end. They open again. I turned to find the stranger, but his chair was empty. Only the imprint of his presence remained, the faint scent of smoke trailing in the air. The golden coin in my pocket grew hot once more, pulsing faster, as though aware of what had just been done. That night, I walked alone to the ruins. The sky was heavy with clouds, the earth still scarred by memory. As I stepped through the same gate where I had once begged for bread, the wind stilled completely. And then, from deep within the broken tower, a single bell rang. Its sound was low, alive, and impossibly clear. After 5 years of silence, the church had spoken again, and it was calling me by name. I knelt at the same gate where I had once begged, the same stones now gleaming with memory and mercy. The years of wandering had ended where they began, yet everything was different. The dust no longer felt cold, and the night no longer whispered my shame. The wind that once carried hunger now carried hymns, and the shadows that had haunted these walls had softened into light. I had come full circle, not to reclaim what I'd lost, but to return what I had finally found. The church rose again from its ashes, not in grandeur, but in grace. I rebuilt it with my own hands, each brick laid with the memory of my fall, each nail driven with the weight of my forgiveness. I refused marble and gold. Instead, I used the stones that had once burned in the fire, the same that had scarred and sanctified me. The people who had once turned away now returned to help, their laughter echoing through walls that had once known only weeping. We rebuilt not a monument to faith, but a shelter for the forgotten. I opened its doors wide, and I never locked them again. The poor came first, the same kind of souls I once envied in their peace. The broken, the weary, the ones the world no longer named. They found a bed where I once found the ground. The hungry shared bread upon the same steps where I had once begged for crumbs. Children laughed in pews that had once held silence, and the sound became the hymn of my redemption. Each morning, I stood at the gate as the sun rose, watching the world unfold through golden light. People called me Father, though I never wore the title. I was not a priest. I was a forgiven man tending the fire that had once destroyed him. Every face I saw carried a fragment of my past: greed, pain, mercy, hope, and I welcomed them all. Sometimes, when the church was quiet and the candles burned low, I felt him near. Gabriel, the stranger who had been both my ruin and my salvation. His voice no longer came as thunder or wind, but as warmth that moved through the silence. I knew then that he had never truly left. He had only stepped beyond what I could see. As I knelt one evening before the altar, the 12 golden coins still resting beneath the cross, I prayed not for forgiveness, but for understanding. And in that moment, it came to me. The truth Gabriel had tried to teach from the beginning. Grace is not earned, it is accepted. The hardest thing a soul can do is not to build or to beg, but to open its hands. The bell rang softly overhead, no longer a warning, but a promise. Its tone rolled through the air like a blessing, spilling through the open gate and into the streets beyond. I rose slowly, my knees trembling under the weight of peace. The setting sun bathed the church in gold, and for the first time, I felt no distance between heaven and earth. As the final echoes of the bell faded, I turned toward the gate. A figure sat there, ragged, silent, his head bowed low. The fading light caught something in his hand, and my breath caught in my chest. It was a golden coin, gleaming softly in the dusk. The man lifted his face, and in his eyes I saw the same hunger I once carried. The circle had not ended. It had opened, for someone new to begin again. If this story moved something inside you, don't let it end here. Subscribe and stay with me, because every tale I tell hides a truth waiting to be found. Share this journey so another lost soul might find their way through the words. And remember, sometimes the next story doesn't begin on screen. It begins with you.